ברוך אתה אדוני למלך העולם בשעה כל נברא. Amen, bro. Okay, let us continue. Weimar. So, point that we're saying right now, that the Rebbe is saying in this discourse, is that thought, speech, and action, those are what we call levushim, garments, garments of the soul. And these garments of the soul are more important than how you feel. What you think, what you say, and what you do is more important than how you feel. Because the main thing that is demanded from us is thought, speech, and action. And it's not only because we have the capacity in that area to um, to deal with, to manage, to dominate, right? Choose our thought, speech, and action, but even more so because it's more important. Not as important what you think, I mean, what you feel rather, and what you think. And we'll understand that because just as clothes themselves, physical clothes, right? The root source of clothes, as everything is, comes from a spiritual place, right? So the root source of clothing is higher than the root source of the individual. And this is recognizable by the fact that when clothes, right, and others, there's spiritual clothes and physical clothes. Physical clothes uh, devolve from the spiritual clothes. And as they draw down here, we recognize the fact that clothing not only encompass the person, that means they're greater than the person, but they also bring beauty to the person. It's clothes that make the man. As Rabbi Yochanan would call to his clothes, they're my glory, they're my honor. Because in their root source, they're greater than the person, so therefore they can bring honor to the person. When you think about it, how does it make sense that clothes can bring honor to an individual? I mean, of course, we understand that that's the reality on the field, but how could that reality be? How does that make sense? It makes sense because they come from a higher place in the spiritual realm. And therefore, they have the capacity to bring glorification uh, and honor to the individual. So, likewise, this is the same thing when it comes to our soul, that the thought, speech, and action is greater than the emotions of the soul. So, if you're feeling something, that's not as important about as how you think about it or talk about it or act upon it. That's much more negeya, much more uh, important than what you're feeling. Therefore, thought, speech, and action of the 613 mitzvahs, which are the garments of the divine soul, right? Like right now, you're thinking, I hope, the words of Torah. Why do I say I hope? Because, you know, uh, maybe I should say I hope. I'm sure you are. I'm thinking them and speaking them, right? So that is making an aliyah, an exaltedness, an ascent to, to my neshama, to your neshama, more than what the neshama is on its own stead. Right. As further, we can appreciate that the only way we can have any pleasure of the divine presence of God is through the mitzvah. And the mitzvah is done with thought, speech, and action. So that's the only way we can connect to the divine, even though we have a divine soul, but to connect to the Shekhinah, the divine presence of God. Right? The fact that you have a divine soul doesn't make it present, doesn't make it connected, right? It's hidden within us. We could completely be lost, right? In other words, we can have thought, speech, and action in material in this world that are not for the sake of a mitzvah, not to connect to the divine will, right? And it's just a garment of my animal soul. I do this for my self-preservation, my survival, physical survival, emotional, psychological survival, right? Which simply put, I do this, um, you know, uh, when it's for an expression of not the godly soul, right? Which the expression of the godly soul is a mitzvah. The expression of the animal soul, as we said, is self-preservation, um, which of course takes on so many different. Most of the things we do is to self-preservation, if you think about it, right? Um, Even the clothes we wear could be for self-preservation. In a physical sense, when it's cold outside or hot outside, we wear clothes to make us feel comfortable. We put on certain clothes to make us look good, right? In the eyes of others. So one's a physical self-preservation because of the weather. Another one is an emotional or psychological self-preservation. I wear this so, others will look at me in a certain way. That's to preserve my feeling okay about myself. Right. So that's all an expression of the animal soul. And since the godly soul is there, now, of course, all those expressions could be also to elevate the person, right? It could be that the clothes, you're wearing because it's Shabbos. So you're wearing this to honor Shabbos, a mitzvah. Um, so then it's not an expression of the animal soul. But if it's an expression of the animal soul, the animal soul brings down the godly soul because they're housed together in you, in me and you. That's why the important thing in our divine service to be aligned with the divine is that we stay away from evil and do good in an actuality, meaning in our thoughts, in our speech, in our actions. Because the intent, the reason why our soul came down here is in order that through our efforts, through our divine service, through us being aligned with the divine, um, that we can ascend to higher heights, to great, uh, more, to become more than what we were before we came down into this world. It's interesting. It's about us in our divine service that we ascend to greater heights, to greater levels of connection and accomplishment. And this is going to be done through the garments of the soul, specifically of thought, speech, and action. Similar to clothing, literally, that through them they add a beauty, they add a glory and an honor to the individual who wears them. Very powerful. The parallels always, are so important to appreciate because that's what gives us, wow, like something else.
So as we improve our thoughts, speech, and actions, are we also embellishing our garments?
That is our garments.
Those are the garments.
Those, the thoughts, right? That is the garments of the soul, right? There's you, yourself, right? Who are you yourself? What's the expression of you? Is your head, your intelligence and your emotions, right? Your intelligence and emotions, that's you. So in other words, that's, one would think, well, that's greater and more important. And that's why this, when you think about this kind of throws therapy, except for cognitive behavior therapy, CBT, it throws the rest of therapy kind of under the bus, if you will. And that, you got to heal your emotional child in you. And this is saying, well, no, no, no. The emotional child in you, right? The traumas that that it, not to say that it didn't have an effect on you, the traumas of youth, what your mother did to you, what your father did to you, and you know, and go dig deep into your emotions. This is saying that what's more important and where do you ascend is not in dealing with the emotional makeup, right? And what's important over here is, on one hand, the emotional makeup of the individual, this deeper part of the individual, and the righteous were able to transform that. to take the negativity of the emotional makeup of the individual and to transform it. So, on one hand, that's that's a greater achievement. It's deeper. It's not garments of the soul, it's the soul itself. Here we're talking about only garments, like what's when you think garments, okay, garments are the clothing that you wear, it's important. But here we're saying actually it comes from a higher place. And that's why, in a physical sense, it's able to protect me, right? From weather elements. I'm thinking about how could garments protect an individual? How does that make sense? I mean, uh, we we experience it, so it's almost like not a valid question because we experience that garments, protect us, and we know that, and like it's like almost a stupid question. Well, philosophically, it's a very valid question. Am I not greater than my garments? So Chassidus comes and says, actually, no. Your garments come from a higher place. That's why it could encompass you, protect you, serve you, and not only that, beautify you. Because in this spiritual idea of what garments are, which is thought, speech, and action, is greater than your soul itself. And that's why it could encompass your soul. That's why it could elevate your soul and beautify your soul. Because even though in your soul you might have an emotional makeup that so on and so forth, that may not be the best. And even if it was healthy, the garments of the soul is greater. And therefore it ascends the soul to a place where it would not have been without the thought, speech, and action that you engage in one of the 613 mitzvahs, as we engage right now in one of them, which is study of Torah. Right? So this is beautifying our soul. My emotional makeup has not really transformed. All right. Okay. Don't worry about that. This then, and we're going to conclude the mimer. This then is why Jericho was the high point of the land of Israel, and why Joshua went to Jericho first. Remember, Jericho, Yericho in Hebrew, is a metaphor for thought, speech, and action of smell. As we explained, smell referring to garments. Garments are thought, speech, and action. So this is why he went first to conquer Jericho, and he was commanded to send spies there, right? Because there, in the thought, speech, and action, we are commanded to have to go away from evil and do good in thought, speech, and action. We have that commandment. So therefore, Joshua was commanded to send spies there to check on how, metaphorically, right? How we can deal with the thought, speech, and action, that they should be all dedicated towards Hashem. Every thought and every word that we say and every action that we take, they should be only dedicated towards Hashem, to God. And through that we come to, then that will give us the opportunity that we come to the next level, that we can reach to the refinement and the transformation of our internal makeup. And physically also that will be expressed in, right, the internal makeup is 7 emotions. And that will bring us to the transformation of the 7 nations in the land of Canaan, of the Canaanites, until we'll be able to expand the land that God has given us, with also conquering not just the 7 nations, but there are, when Abraham was given the blessing, he was given 10 10 nations. Kinini, Kini, Kanizi, Bikadmoini, but those were not conquered by Joshua, because those are referring not to the emotional makeup of the soul, but they are the three that are the intelligence, Chabad, Chochmah, Bina V'das, that's what it refers to, that also needs to be transformed, but that will only be done through Mashiach. Till Mashiach, the most that can be done is transformation of the 7 nations. But then there will be expansion of the land of Israel. Will be including Transjordan, but that's where those 3 nations are. With the coming of Mashiach, our righteous one, because of Mamish, speedily in our days. That is the end of the mimer. Wow. Unreal.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Unreal. I hope you got it, folks. Yeah?
Yeah, got it.
Beautiful. All right, we'll see you shortly. Thank you, folks.
Thank you.